The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and endings. Julian Ashford stood under the fluorescent lights in a coat that cost more than the nurses' cars, and beside him, half a step too close for a colleague, stood a woman named Bianca, whose perfume did not belong in a maternity ward at 4 in the morning. A doctor had just told him that his wife was gone. Complications. They did everything they could. The baby survived. We are so sorry. And Julian Ashford, God forgive him, had felt, underneath the shock, underneath the correct and trembling face he was making, one small, monstrous, unmistakable flicker, relief. Bianca's hand found his elbow, supportive, proprietary, already redecorating. "It's terrible," she whispered, "but Julian, breathe. Everything happens for a reason." They stood there, the two of them, in their beautiful coats, holding their secret like a bottle of champagne they would have to wait a decent interval to open. And that was when the doctor came back. She was older, grey at the temples, with the kind of eyes that have watched 1,000 families in corridors and sorted every one of them correctly. She looked at Bianca's hand on his elbow for exactly 1 second. Then she leaned toward Julian Ashford, and quietly, so quietly that only he could hear it, she said the 11 words that would dismantle his life. She was conscious at the end. "She asked me to tell you." The doctor paused, and there was nothing gentle left in her voice. "She knew. She wanted you to know that she knew everything." The corridor tilted. Somewhere behind him, Bianca was asking what the doctor had said. "What's wrong, Julian? You've gone white." But Julian Ashford was no longer in the corridor. He was falling down the inside of himself, past every lie of the last 8 months, every business dinner, every silenced call, all the way down to the bottom, where a single question waited for him with its arms crossed. She knew, since when, and the answer, though he would not learn the details for 6 years, was the worst one possible. Since the beginning of the end, since the exact night it mattered most. 6 years later, on a Tuesday morning in spring, a little girl ran across the lawn of one of the largest private estates in the country. She was 6 years old. She had escaped her mother's hand near the service entrance because the garden was enormous and full of flowers, and 6-year-olds have policies about flowers. Her mother was the new housekeeper, first day. The agency had said the owner was a recluse, a millionaire nobody ever saw, and that the pay was double because the house was triple. The little girl gathered a fist of white flowers she was almost certainly not allowed to pick, and 40 meters away, behind the tall window of a silent study, a man who had not truly slept in 6 years looked up from his desk, out at the garden, at the small trespasser on his lawn, and Julian Ashford stopped breathing, because the little girl stealing his flowers had his dead wife's face. Not a resemblance, not a trick of distance. Her face, the tilt of the head, the exact stubborn chin, the way she inspected each flower like it owed her an explanation, which Clara had done, in that same garden, a lifetime ago, back when this house had contained a marriage. The coffee cup in Julian's hand reached the floor before he noticed he had dropped it. To understand what happened next, you have to go back. Back 6 years, to the worst night of 3 people's lives. Back to the night Clara Ashford died, or rather, to the night everyone believed she did. Clara Ashford was 8 months pregnant, alone in a 12-bedroom house, and looking for a phone charger. That was all. That was the entire crime. Her phone had died, his spare charger was in his study, and his tablet was on the desk, awake, still logged in, because arrogant men are careless men. The message arrived while she was standing there. She didn't mean to read it. Then she read it. Then she sat down in her husband's chair, one hand on her belly, and read 8 months of them. The business dinners, the conferences, the exhaustion he wore home like cologne. All of it had a name, and the name was in his phone under a client's company, and the name was Bianca, and the most recent message, sent 20 minutes earlier, said, Tell the whale you're stuck at dinner. I'll order the champagne." The whale. Clara Ashford looked down at her 8-month belly, at the daughter sleeping inside it. That was when the first contraction hit, a month early, alone, in his chair. She called him 4 times from the car service on the way to the hospital. 4 times, she watched the call ring, and go quiet, not to voicemail, silenced, which is different, which is a thumb making a decision. She texted, "The baby's coming, something's wrong, please." The reply came 9 minutes later. "In the middle of dinner, can't leave, it's probably false contractions. Breathe like the classes, I'll come by in the morning." Clara read it in the back seat of a car, gripping the door handle through a contraction that was absolutely not false, and something inside her, something that had been cracking quietly for 8 months without her knowing why, finished breaking. It didn't shatter. That's the thing about strong things. It broke clean, along a line, into a new shape. By the time the car reached the hospital, Clara Ashford had stopped crying. She would not cry again for a very long time. The nurse who took her in was named Rosa, 52 years old, 29 of them on that ward, with 4 arms that had caught 1,000 babies, and eyes that missed nothing. Rosa saw a woman in premature labor arrive alone at 10 at night in a car service. Rosa saw the phone with the silenced calls. Rosa saw the lock screen photo, a wedding, a mansion, a smiling man, and did the arithmetic that women like Rosa do in half a second. "Where is he, honey?" "At dinner," Clara said, in a voice from the bottom of the sea. "He's at dinner." Rosa held her hand through the next contraction and said nothing, because there was nothing to say and everything to do. But when the complications began, an hour later, when the monitors changed their tone and the room filled with people and Clara, fading, gripped Rosa's wrist with the strength of the dying and pulled her close. Rosa leaned in, and what Clara whispered to her, between the alarms, was not a prayer, and was not a message for her husband. It was a question. "If I live," she whispered, "does he have to know? What happened in that operating room over the next 3 hours belongs to the doctors." A hemorrhage, a daughter, pulled into the world at 14 in the morning, 4 pounds and furious, which the nurses agreed was an excellent sign. And a mother who coded once on the table and came back because some women have unfinished business with the world. Clara Ashford woke at dawn in recovery, hollowed out and alive, with a tube in her arm and a decision already made, because she had made it going under. The way you grab the one thing that matters from a burning house. Rosa was sitting beside her. Of course she was. "He's in the corridor," Rosa said quietly. "He arrived 20 minutes after the delivery." He brought. Rosa's jaw did something complicated. "He's not alone." Clara looked at the ceiling for a while. "The woman?" she asked. "The woman," Rosa confirmed. "He brought her," Clara said slowly, testing each word, "to the hospital, where I was dying, having his child." Rosa said nothing, in the loudest possible way. And Clara Ashford turned her head, looked at this stranger who had held her hand across the border of death and back, and said the sentence that started everything. "Rosa, I need you to help me disappear." Any reasonable nurse would have said no. It was insane. Possibly illegal. In 6 small ways Rosa could name off the top of her head, and she named them, in a furious whisper, for 10 straight minutes, while Clara listened patiently, the way you wait out weather. And then Rosa ran out of objections, and looked at the young woman in the bed, 29 years old. No parents. Rosa had checked the file. No siblings. Married to a corridor full of cologne and champagne. Every single person who was supposed to catch this girl had dropped her, except one stranger on a night shift. 29 years on that ward, Rosa said at last, to the ceiling, to her pension, to her better judgment. 29 years. And I've never once falsified so much as a lunch break. She looked at Clara. "My sister lives in a small city, 4 hours south. There's a hospital there. I know the head of records. We did our training together, and she owes me." Her voice dropped to a whisper with steel inside it. "Transfers happen. Papers move. Women with no next of kin, who pay their own bills, can call themselves what they like." Clara gripped her hand. "But you listen to me," Rosa said, leaning close, one finger up. The finger of every mother in history. "You do not do this for revenge. Revenge is a house with no floor. You do it for one reason only, or not at all." She pointed through the wall, toward the nursery. "You do it so that girl grows up watching her mother stand up, instead of watching her bake." What the hospital recorded, and what the family was told, diverged at 6:40 that morning, and the divergence was small, and quiet, and absolute. A doctor, the older one, with grey temples, who had spent 20 minutes with Rosa in a stairwell and come out with her jaw set, informed the husband of complications and of a loss, using sentences that were, one by one, technically true. She was conscious at the end, true. Of the end of Clara Ashford, which is not the same as the end of Clara. She asked me to tell you that she knew everything, true, word for word. The rest, the grief of the staff, the paperwork, the sealed procedures, moved the way institutions move, heavily, plausibly, past a man to flattened by 11 quiet words to inspect any of it. There are cracks in every system. That morning, a 29-year-old woman and a 4-pound baby girl slipped through one of them, southbound, in the back of Rose's sister's van, wrapped in hospital blankets, running on donated formula and rage that had already cooled into something much more useful, purpose. Clara Ashford was pronounced gone. In the back of a van on the southern highway, Clara Mendez, her mother's name, her own name now, watched the sun come up over fields with her daughter on her chest. "Alice," she whispered, her grandmother's name. "Hello, Alice. It's just us," and she smiled, actually smiled, at the terrifying freedom of the truth. Just us turned out to be enough. The funeral was magnificent and almost empty. Julian buried a sealed casket. On medical advice he was in no condition to question. In front of 40 business associates, 6 photographers, and no family, because Clara had none, which had once, to his shame, been convenient. Bianca attended, in tasteful black, for Rose back, performing a colleague's grief. And Julian Ashford stood at the grave of his wife, holding a daughter he did not know how to hold. A nurse hired that week hovering at his elbow, and waited to feel the relief again. It did not come. It never came again. What came instead, at the grave, in the empty mansion, at 3 in the morning over a crib he was afraid to approach, was the doctor's voice. She knew everything, every night. 11 words. He would have given the entire fortune, all of it, every property and every account, for 1 hour to ask her a single question. "How long did you know? While I let you sit in that house alone?" The dead don't answer. That, Julian was learning, is the entire punishment. There is no appeal. There is no settlement. The dead don't negotiate. He was 30 years old, and the richest man in his family's history, and he had just discovered the one debt that cannot be restructured. Bianca lasted 7 months. She waited the decent interval. She moved a toothbrush in, then a wardrobe, then opinions about the nursery. She was patient and strategic and beautiful, and she had won, except that the prize had stopped existing on a Tuesday at 4 in the morning in a hospital corridor. The man she had wanted was confident, careless, and hers. The man who remained stared at cribs, fired chefs for cooking Clara's dishes, left dinners, her dinners now, to sit in the garden where his wife used to inspect the flowers. "You have to move on," she told him. "In month 6. It's morbid, Julian, she's gone." And Julian looked at her, from a long way away, and said the only honest thing he ever said to her. "She's not gone. She's everywhere. You're the one who was never here." Bianca moved out in month 7, taking the wardrobe and leaving the toothbrush, a detail Julian found strangely clarifying. Within a year she had rebranded the whole chapter at the dinner parties as her lucky escape from a broken man. She kept exactly one thing from those years, without knowing it, a face. She had seen Clara alive twice, at company events, across rooms. Most people forget a face like that. Bianca Reyes forgot nothing. It was her only sincere talent, remember that. Grief with guilt in it does not heal, it compounds. Julian Ashford spent 6 years paying interest. He sold the 12-bedroom house within a year, couldn't live in it, couldn't sell it either in the end, so he moved to the estate outside the city, the quiet one, the one with the garden Clara had loved, and he had never once walked through with her, which was, he understood perfectly, why he chose it. He worked, he raised his daughter through a rotation of excellent nannies, and his own clumsy, improving, 3 a.m. devotion. He was not a bad father. He was a haunted one, which the child, sharp as her mother, eventually noticed and named. Papa, why are you sad at my birthdays? He funded things, compulsively, anonymously, maternity wings, 4 of them, in 4 cities. A foundation for women giving birth alone, staffed, at his written insistence, with senior nurses on every night shift, paid double. His accountants called it philanthropy. It was not philanthropy. It was a man leaving flowers at every grave, but the right one. On one drawer of his desk, the locked one, held a private investigator's file, 6 years old and still open, on the one detail that had never sat right. The burial records of Clara Ashford had a gap in them, small, explainable, probably nothing. 6 years, and he had never let it go. 4 hours south, Clara Mendez built a small life with her own hands, and it was good. A rented room above a fabric shop first, then 2 rooms, then a small flat with a kitchen, where things were always simmering, she sewed. Her mother had taught her before dying, a lifetime ago, and it turned out the skill had waited in her hands like money in an old coat. Wedding dresses, school uniforms, curtains for half the street. Rosa visited every month, then, upon retiring, moved south herself, 4 doors down, and was upgraded from co-conspirator to godmother, a title she wore like a general's stars. And Alice grew. Alice, who inspected flowers like they owed her an explanation. Alice, who at 4 asked where her father was, and was told, truthfully, far away, and he is missing the best thing in the world, and seemed, after consideration, satisfied that the loss was his. They were not rich. The electric bill had opinions. Some months were flour and eggs months. But no one in that small flat ever begged, and no one was ever lied to. And a girl grew up watching her mother stand. It was enough. It was more than enough. Until the fabric shop closed, and the rent went up, and an agency 4 hours north offered a housekeeper's position at triple the usual rate, in a big quiet estate, for a reclusive owner nobody ever saw. Clara did everything right, ask anyone. Ask Rosa, who checked. The agency contract had no owner's name, just a holding company, which is normal for the wealthy. The interviews were with a house manager. The estate was listed under a trust with a neutral name. Because a broken man had hidden even his address from the world, she accepted on a Thursday. The school year had a gap, so on the first Tuesday, just once, just for one day, she brought Alice, with a colouring book and strict instructions. Stay by the service entrance, my love, don't wander. Alice, 6 years old, her mother's daughter in every cell, lasted 4 minutes. Because the garden was enormous, and full of flowers, and so we arrived back where we began. A spring Tuesday, a study window, a dropped coffee cup. A man who has spent 6 years funding night nurses and staring at a gap in a burial record, looking out at a little girl with a fist of stolen white flowers and his dead wife's exact, impossible, stubborn chin. Julian Ashford stood at the glass, not breathing, while 6 years of careful grief rearranged itself into a single, ice cold, world-ending question. Whose child is that? He turned from the window. And he went downstairs. Bianca Reyes did not sell the photograph to a tabloid. Tabloids pay once. She had learned, in 6 years of exile from the rooms that mattered, to think in annuities. She verified first, because she was thorough. 2 days in the small southern city, sunglasses and a rented car, and there it was, unmistakable, at 3 in the afternoon outside a school gate. The dead woman, alive, laughing, taking a backpack from a small girl with a stubborn chin. Bianca watched from across the street, and what she felt was not shock. It was inventory, a fake death, a hidden child, a billionaire widower who was either a criminal or a fool, and juries of public opinion convict both. And somewhere in the paperwork of it all, hospital staff, real people with real licenses, who had helped, because dead women do not discharge themselves. She drove back north doing the arithmetic out loud. And on Monday morning, without an appointment, wearing white, Bianca Reyes walked into Julian Ashford's study for the first time in 6 years, sat down uninvited, and placed a photograph face up on his desk. "Hello, Julian," she said. "We need to talk about your gardening staff." To his credit, and it surprised her, Julian did not perform. He looked at the photograph of the school gate for a moment, and then at her, and waited. "You knew," Bianca said, reading him, "interesting. That's actually worse for you." She crossed her legs, comfortable, a woman back in her favorite room, other people's leverage. "Let me tell you what I have. A dead wife who shops for groceries. A funeral, Julian, with photographers. I was there, I wore black. A child of," she tilted her head, "interesting arithmetic. And somewhere, a paper trail with real names on it. Nurses, doctors, people who committed, at minimum, several fascinating crimes. What do you want?" Julian said. "What I was owed." Her voice didn't rise. It never had. That was the horror of her. 2 years of my life went into you. I left with a toothbrush and a reputation as your rebound mistake. So, a consulting contract, generous, indefinite. A board seat on one of the foundations. The maternity one, I think, she smiled. I like the irony. And the public rehabilitation, dinners, photographs, the story corrected, and if not, then I make one phone call, and your wife dies a second time, Bianca said pleasantly, publicly, slowly, with her accomplices' names attached. And this time, Julian, you get to watch. Julian Ashford looked at the woman in white in his study, and had a strange, clarifying, almost peaceful thought. 6 years ago, he had been afraid of exactly this shape of person, because he had been exactly this shape of person, and their shared language had felt like intimacy. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had been to the bottom. There is a freedom down there. I'll need time, he said. Structures like that take lawyers. You have a week, said Bianca, rising, smoothing the white suit. And Julian, don't do anything emotional. She collected the photograph, patted it into her bag like a pet. The woman faked her death to escape you. Imagine what she'd do when she learns you brought me back into her life. The door closed behind her. Julian sat for 1 full minute. Then he did the emotional thing. He drove 4 hours south, knocked on the door of a small flat above a former fabric shop. And when Clara opened it, chain still on, eyes instantly narrow, he said the sentence he should have said in a hospital corridor 6 years ago. Something's wrong, and you need to know everything, immediately, because this time, I'm not spending the night at the wrong table. They convened in Clara's small kitchen, because all wars in this story decided in kitchens. Clara, Julian, Rosa, summoned from 4 doors down, arriving in the funeral and weddings coach with the face of a general who has been expecting the war for 6 years. And, asleep down the hall, the reason for all of it. Julian told them everything, the photograph. The demands, the deadline. He left nothing out, softened nothing, and when he finished, he put both hands flat on the table. "Whatever we do," he said, "we do on one principle. Rosa, the doctor, the records administrator, everyone who helped that night, remains untouchable. If someone has to burn for this, it's me. I'll say I knew from the start. I'll say I staged the whole thing. I don't care." "That's noble," said Rosa, "and idiotic. Nobody would believe you knew. You spent 6 years building maternity wards like a man haunted. There are witnesses to your grief, boy. Grief was your alibi and your crime." "Then what?" Julian said. And that was when Clara, who had been silent, looking at the table, looking at the middle distance, looking at 6 years, started, very quietly, to laugh. They both turned. "She has nothing," Clara said. "Think," Clara said, "both of you. What did we actually do that night?" She counted on her fingers, flower-scarred, steady. A patient, conscious and of sound mind, requested a transfer to another hospital. Paperwork exists, signed. A records administrator processed a transfer, legal. A nurse accompanied a discharged patient south, legal. A woman began using her mother's surname, which, she looked at Julian, I never legally changed, because I never legally had to. Also legal, but the death certificate, Julian said slowly. The funeral, I buried. You buried a casket your own people arranged in a fog of grief, Clara said, gently, because this part was surgery, Julian. Did you ever, once, in 6 years, actually see a death certificate? Silence. The gap, Julian whispered. The gap, Clara confirmed. The doctor told you the truth in 11 words and let you assume the rest. The hospital recorded a transfer. No certificate was ever filed, because none could be, because I didn't die. Legally, Julian, I have never been dead. I've been missing. And a grown woman with no criminal charges is allowed to be missing. It's not a crime to leave your husband. It's barely even original. Rosa sat back slowly, 29 years of wards, rearranging themselves into a smile. The girl checked, she said, with enormous pride, to no one. 6 years ago, half dead on a gurney, and she built the whole thing out of legal moves. I helped and I didn't even see it, Bianca, Clara said. Thinks she's holding a bomb. She's holding a story. And there's exactly one way to defuse a story. She looked at Julian. You tell it first. It has to be me, Clara said. My face, my voice, my words. If your press office touches it, I'm a billionaire's managed scandal forever. If I tell it, I'm a woman who walked out on a bad marriage in the hardest way available. Women will understand it in one sentence. Most of them have drafted the plan 3 in the morning at least once. Julian was shaking his head. The moment you surface, everything lands on you. The cameras, the questions, Alice's face in the papers. You built 6 years of quiet, Clara. This burns it all. And it burns it to save me from a blackmailer. I won't trade your peace for my Julian. Clara stopped him, and her voice had none of the kitchen war in it now. None of the granite. For the first time in 6 years, she sounded, simply, tired, and underneath the tired, something else. I'm not doing it to save you. I'm doing it because I am sick to death of being a secret. She looked down the hall, toward the sleeping room. My daughter thinks her mother has no photographs from before she was born. She thinks we have no family because I'm shy. In 2 years, she'll be old enough to find the edges of the story herself, and I will not have her learn that her mother spent her whole childhood hiding. She turned back to the table. Rosa told me, the night it all started, that I was allowed to do this for one reason only, so that my girl grows up watching her mother stand up. Well, Clara Mendez pushed back her chair and stood 4 hours south of a grave with her name on it. She's about to watch. But first, before any of it, before cameras and statements and the end of the quiet, There was a 6-year-old eating cereal who was owed the truth and got it on a Saturday morning, at her own table, from her mother, with Rosa standing by like a treaty guarantor. They kept it simple, the way you keep true things. The sad man from the big garden, Clara said, "Julian, my love, he's your father." Alice put down her spoon and processed this with the full gravity of 6 1/4. "The flower man," she verified. "The flower man." Alice considered the ceiling for a moment, assembling the file. Then she delivered the finding that would be repeated, later, at a wedding, at a graduation, at every family table for decades, by everyone who had been within earshot. "You said my father was far away, and that he was missing the best thing in the world." "I did say that," Clara agreed carefully. Alice nodded, case closed, and picked her spoon back up. "I knew it was me," she said. "Poor man. He looked exactly like someone missing the best thing in the world." Rosa had to leave the kitchen. General officers do not cry at treaty signings. There was no press conference. Clara had refused the word itself. There was one video, 4 minutes long, recorded in Rose's sitting room by the goddaughter of a retired nurse, on a phone on a Tuesday. No lighting kit, no press office, a woman at a kitchen table with her hands folded, talking. "My name is Clara. 6 years ago, the newspapers said I died in childbirth. I didn't. I found out, the night my daughter was born, in the worst possible way, that my marriage was a lie. I was alone, and I nearly died, and when I didn't, I made a choice. I chose to disappear rather than to stay and be managed. I have never been legally dead. I've been legally gone. There's a difference, and the difference was the whole point." She looked into the phone camera steadily. "Nobody helped me commit any crime, because there was no crime. Kind people helped a patient transfer hospitals and start over, which happens every day, quietly, and thank God it does. My husband knew nothing. His grief was real. I've seen the maternity wards he built with it. And to the person who found my photograph and thought it was worth money." Clara Mende smiled, very slightly, into 8 million future views. "Thank you. 6 years is long enough. You can't blackmail anyone with a story she's willing to tell herself." The video did what truth does when it's finally allowed outside. It went everywhere at once. And the world, which had been promised a scandal, got something it had no shelf for. A woman who outplanned a billionaire from a hospital gurney. A conspiracy of nurses that broke no laws and took no money. A husband whose punishment had been 11 words and 6 years, and who confirmed every syllable of her account within the hour, in a statement that contained one sentence his own lawyers begged him to delete, and which he kept, and which became the headline. "She owed me nothing. I owed her the truth, and I paid 6 years late." The public verdict arrived within a day, and it was not close. The nurses became folk heroes. The Grey Temple doctor, tracked down and retired, and utterly unrepentant, gave a single quote that was printed on tote bags within the week. "I told him only true things. What he assumed was between him and his conscience." And every journalist worth a press badge asked the same next question. If nobody sold this story, who was shopping it? Bianca Reyes learned that the grenade had gone off in her own hand from her phone, at a charity committee brunch, where the video was passed around the table with the little gasps of women scenting a story, and she had to sit through 11 minutes of speculation about who the blackmailer could possibly be, wearing the smile, the corridor smile, while it died on her face by degrees. She had made the phone calls, in advance, to 2 editors, teasing an exclusive. Editors keep records. Editors, scorned out of an exclusive by the subject herself going public, keep grudges. By the weekend, her name was out, and with her name came the archaeology. The old company records, the travel logs, the messages, subpoenaed once for an unrelated audit years ago, and never quite forgotten by the people who had processed them, one of which, dated the night in question, 20 minutes before a woman went into premature labor alone, read, "Tell the whale stuck at dinner. I'll order the champagne." Clara never released it. She had carried the screenshot for 6 years, the loaded weapon in the locked drawer of her, and in the end she never fired it. She never had to. The world, it turns out, has excellent aim on its own. The committee brunch stopped calling, the consulting work evaporated. Bianca Reyes had spent 6 years rebuilding a reputation out of charity photographs, and it came down in 6 days, and the last anyone heard, she had moved abroad, to a city where nobody knew her face. Which was, Rosa observed, over tea, the correct sentence. The woman spent her whole life being unforgettable to men and invisible to women. Now she gets to be invisible to everyone, poetry. And then the noise faded, as noise does, and what remained was the actual work. Being a father, Julian discovered, is not a lump sum. It's installments. He learned to drive 4 hours without calling it far. He learned that Saturdays belonged to a small flat that smelled of simmering, where he was received with terms, and a chair that became, over months, his chair. He learned to braid hair badly, then adequately, from a video, practicing at night on 3 shoelaces taped to his desk in the study of a 40-room estate. He never once arrived with a gift bigger than his own attendance. Rosa had briefed him, start small, start invisible. The music program, the school stayed anonymous, the frozen rent stayed anonymous. What arrived visibly, every single Saturday, was one man, on time, with flowers from a specific garden, because a settlement, once made, must be honoured. For Alice, always the smallest one in the bunch, by contract. And one for the kitchen table, unlabelled, unremarked. Placed, every week, in a small blue vase that had appeared on Clara's windowsill at some point that spring, to the left of the window. Neither of them ever said a word about it. The vase said plenty. In the autumn, the estate changed. Not publicly, internally, the staff noticed, because staff notice everything, that the nursery at the end of the hall, the sealed room, the 6-year museum, stood open one Monday, and the owner was inside it, in old clothes, painting. He refused the decorators. He refused, twice, politely, the offer of professionals who could finish it in a day. It took him 6 weekends, and the second coat was honestly questionable, and he did it all himself, because some debts you pay with your own hands or not at all. It became a girl's room, not a shrine, not a bribe, bookshelves, a desk by the window, because the light was good for drawing. A bed with a quilt that Rosa, sworn to secrecy, had sewn measurements for. And on the door, where a nameplate would go, nothing, because he had not earned the assumption. The first time Alice stayed over, a trial run, one Saturday, negotiated by treaty, terms strict, Rosa on call like an emergency service. She inspected the room for 11 minutes in total silence, while her father stood in the doorway not breathing. "It's not pink," she said at last. "You don't like pink," Julian said. "You told me in June. You said pink is for strawberry ice cream and nothing else." Alice turned and looked at him for a long moment, 6.5 years old, her mother's entire face. "You listen," she said, in the tone of an auditor closing a satisfactory file. "Papa, it was the first time." Julian Ashford made it all the way to the hallway before the second coat of questionable paint got to watch a billionaire sit down on the floor. And Clara. The world, which loves a bow on things, kept asking, in comment sections, and at Rose's market stall and once, memorably, via a magazine cover, whether they were back together. The answer was better than a bow. The answer was Sunday dinners at the small table, where a man once too important for his own house learned to do dishes to Rose's standard, which exceeded any hotel's. The answer was to people who had hurt each other in the largest available ways, learning to be excellent at the small ones. The answer was Clara, one evening, at the door, watching him carry a sleeping Alice to the car with a care that could not be performed, saying, quietly, not to him, to Rosa, beside her. "I buried that man 6 years ago." Rosa waited. "The one carrying her," Clara said. "I don't know him yet." She watched the car lights turn at the end of the street. "But I've decided he's allowed to keep introducing himself." Rosa, 29 years of corridors, 52 years of arithmetic, sipped her tea and rendered the final verdict of the whole affair. "Slowest wedding I'll ever cater," she said. "Good, the fast ones are the ones I'm worrying about." On the anniversary, the 7th one, the strangest anniversary in any calendar, the anniversary of a death that never happened, they did something no grief counselor would have invented. They went, all 4 of them, to the grave. It was still there, granite, tasteful, the dates, as noted, a bit much. Legally, it had never been anyone's grave, just a stone over a weighted box, the most expensive piece of theatre grief ever staged, and Julian had asked, once, whether Clara wanted it removed. She had thought about it for a week and said no. "Leave it," she said. That woman existed. She was married to a stranger, and she waited alone in big rooms, and she died in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning, 11 words at a time. She looked at the stone. Somebody should mark that. So they stood there, the 4 of them, on a spring Tuesday. And Alice, who had been briefed with the whole truth, because this family had retired from secrets professionally, placed on the grave of the woman her mother used to be a fist of white flowers. "The smallest ones," she explained, "are the strongest. They grow in the cracks." Nobody managed to answer that. The flowers were from the garden, of course they were. The letter arrived on a Thursday, in a government envelope, addressed to Mrs. Rosa Delgado, retired. Rosa read it at her kitchen table, twice, and then sat very still for a moment, which for Rosa was a scream, a formal notification. The National Medical Licensing Board had opened a review into the events at a certain maternity ward 6 years prior. Anonymous complaint, alleged irregularities in patient transfer procedures. Under review, the license status, pension eligibility, and professional record of 1 retired nurse, 1 records administrator, and 1 retired senior obstetrician, grey at the temples. The complaint was anonymous. The postmark on the tip that triggered it was not domestic. It had come from abroad, from a city where nobody knew a certain woman's face, and where, evidently, 6 days of ruin had curdled into something with paperwork. Bianca's had 1 grenade left. She couldn't reach Clara anymore, or Julian, or the story. So she had aimed at the only unarmored people on the field, the jury. Rosa walked the 4 doors to Clara's flat and put the letter on the kitchen table without a word. Clara read it once, and the people who knew her, which by now was a street, a nurse, a reformed billionaire, and a 6-year-old, would all have recognized what happened next, the stillness, the clean break along the line, the new shape. She looked up. "They stood up for me," Clara said. "Every one of them, a gurney, 4 in the morning, no reason to risk anything, and they chose me." She folded the letter with terrible precision. "Now we stand up for them." Julian arrived within the hour, because some phone calls he no longer silenced, would never silence again, had driven 4 hours in what Rosa clocked, disapprovingly and gratefully, as 3 1/4. He read the letter standing in the kitchen, where all wars in this story are decided. Then he took out his phone, and Clara watched something she had never actually seen in 9 years of knowing him, the thing his rivals used to describe in interviews with a certain haunted respect. "Julian Ashford going to work. Board reviews are public if the accused requests it," he said, dialing. "So we request it. Open doors, open records, cameras if they want them." Bianca's whole life has been done in whispers. She has never once won anything in daylight. He looked up at Clara and Rosa, and the sad man from the big garden was gone entirely, and what stood in the small kitchen was something new, something 6 years and 400 Saturdays in the making. A family, closing ranks, they helped a patient stand up, Julian said. "Let's go show a board of directors what she looks like standing."